Base rates at 5.25%, with the expectation that that is the end, that we have capped out now and the only way is down. From the perspective of healthcare M&A, I think a lot of that uncertainty has now started to dissipate. I do think there is slightly more confidence in returning to that NHS market. Welcome to the first 2024 water cooler. So we use this water cooler recorder every year on one of the first days back in the office to talk about what happened in the prior year and what our expectations are for the forthcoming one. So interestingly, before we recorded this, I watched back our 2023 presentation and whether we were right or not, which I suppose is key to the value in these. And generally, theme-wise, we were pretty right in the sense that when we recorded this last year, base rates were sat at 3.5%, and we anticipated they would continue to go up. But where we got it wrong is we anticipated that interest rates would kind of cap out around 4.5%. And I think what we saw last year in the end was interest rates going up a lot faster and indeed to a higher level than most anticipated. So as we sit here now, base rates at 5.25%, with the expectation that that is the end, that we have capped out now and the only way is down. And it's fair to say, I think that had a fair reflection on the market last year.
I think it did, and the key, message was a lot of buyers were uncertain, and with uncertainty, there becomes risk. Banks were uncertain on where interest rates were going to go. Buyers didn't know the repayments. Buyers were uncertain whether base rate was going to keep on going up. At one stage, I think a lot of economists thought it would go up to 6.5%. Luckily, that didn't happen, but all that uncertainty meant that a proportion of the buyer pool that were looking for a practice decided to hibernate and be associates. Associate pay. If you're an associate out there netting 120k, it was do I buy a practice or do I continue to build a deposit for the future and maybe hibernate for that period of time, become associates in a very stable business and put off buying a practice. So we did see, I think especially for the first half of the year, activity did drop, but as certainty in interest rates has kind of become more certain, what we've seen is a number of them buyers come back to the market, and over the last 8 weeks we've had a very strong 8 weeks, would you say?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair to say. I think obviously the underlying theme of last year was uncertainty, and I say that with a slight double-edged sword in the fact that I think we probably enter 2024 under similar kind of theme with the various different world events that are going on. But from the perspective of healthcare M&A, I think a lot of that uncertainty has now started to dissipate, and indeed did dissipate probably in the mid to late autumn. So particularly if you talk about interest rates, so we anticipate now that they will certainly be in the 4s come the summer. How low they will go in the 4s remains to be seen. Some touting now that they may even hit as low as 4% by the end of the year, given the really promising news on food inflation that was released this morning. But whether they will drop that far that quickly, of course, does depend on other factors, such as indeed we'll probably have an election this year, and that will probably mean a change in tax legislation. So there'll be all sorts of things that will be thrown into the mix over the course of 2024, which may impact that. But I think we can be fairly certain that interest rates will go down. The other thing, of course, under the theme of interest rates is what also happened last year is we predicted that a lot of the groups would be a bit quieter and we'll probably look at repricing deals. Certainly at the beginning part of the year with the Dentex Portman merger. Now, what happened in reality was that went on for a lot longer than we had hoped it would do. And I think it's probably fair to say that most of the groups, whilst they were in the market, they weren't really that aggressive until, as you said, we probably got to the mid to late autumn.
I think shackles is the word, isn't it? A lot of these private equity houses put the shackles on the corporate groups, and they only really wanted them to be aggressive on the right deal, i.e., a lower multiple than previous and probably on terms which probably weren't the best terms on the market. So what you found is a lot of practices that previously would have sold to a corporate group because they were paying, let's say, 8 times 8.25 on a single practice and on an 80-20 basis, a lot of them groups simply couldn't offer them same deal terms from a financial perspective. So a lot of deals moved to 70-30, even slightly higher than that. And of course, when the multiples weren't at 8 times, it didn't make commercial sense for the vendors to take them deals. So what we did find is the emergence of the micro consolidator or the mini group, the individual that owns 5 practices, that has been trading for 5 years, have paid off a large portion of the debt, had a good facility with a bank, and were strong bank buyers. And what that meant is them mini groups groups could acquire, could buy a practice for, let's say, 7 times, pay the vendor 90% on completion, and maybe do a deferred 10% from a cash flow perspective for a year. And them deal terms were a lot stronger and a lot more beneficial from a seller point of view. So we did see the emergence of the micro consolidator to really give some competition to them groups. Likewise, next year, we expect the groups to probably turn around because they need to acquire.
Yeah, I think a lot of the bigger groups were starting to get slightly frustrated. There was one group who was particularly aggressive last year who probably cleaned up on some of the bigger deals, and I think they're going to find this year probably more competitive than they enjoyed in the previous year. Because, of course, what the reality was is for some bigger practices is that if, as you said, they were on the deal terms they were only getting 5 times their profits on completion, and the rest of it was sort of linked to future performance of the practice. Where in essence they were still on the hook. So the argument was that they might as well have pocketed that money themselves and then gone on to sell the practice at a cheaper price at a later stage. So lots of people made those kind of decisions last year, which I think is one of the factors that contributed to deal volume being down slightly. We anticipate that now the micro consolidators have sort of really started to get their teeth in, that the groups will have to be slightly more competitive certainly on terms, and that will start to mean that the deal volume will increase over the coming months. I think it's probably fair to say.
Yeah.
And I suppose in terms of what 2024 holds other than that, is that generally I think overall we expect deal volume to go up. It'll be interesting to see what happens with NHS activity, because I do think there is slightly more confidence returning to that NHS market with regarding recruitment and regarding with how the NHS deal with practices that are underperforming, and indeed a lot of practices are now working out how they can perform more of their NHS content than they previously did so. So I think we'll see some interesting moves in the NHS market, particularly I think in the bigger cities and towns, unfortunately probably slightly less so out in the more rural areas. And generally speaking, I think it will be interesting to see what happens in terms of practice revenues. So I think a lot of people are concerned that the increase in national living wage, which is a second big chunky increase coming in April of over £1 an hour, that will have a knock-on effect in ancillary staff costing, and ultimately that ancillary staff costing, even if you're not paying the staff minimum wage, has to come from somewhere. It goes up the rest of the wage scale. And that increase in cost will have to be offset somewhere, and a lot of that will probably be in price rises. And I guess it's how much consumers will stomach if you're looking to implement a further 7 to 8% rise on prices, which was similar to what a lot of practices did last year.
And probably what I'd draw reference to there is downloading our benchmarking report, which we did last year, as well as our interim goodwill report, which are both available on our website. There's some really good stats on UDA rates, pay rates averages across the UK, and also goodwill values and multiples over the last 6 months. Really useful data there. It'll be interesting to see how that materialises over the next 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the underlying message 2024 is the market's still good, it's strong. There are some challenges and there will be some hurdles, particularly in managing cost and revenue in order to maintain EBITDA. But as ever, our team are here, and if you're looking at a practice health check to assist you in kind of maintaining those levels of EBITDA and this maintaining value and even looking to grow it, then we do offer free valuations and health checks to anyone who's considering some kind of exit over the next 5 to 10 years, and to give us a call.